You're about to drop in on one of our live draw-along studio sessions where this slightly bewildered-looking architect is going to show you how he produced these images, not from a SketchUp model, not from a rendering program, but from this 15-minute sketch. You'll see how the design evolved, the perspective sketching workflow used to draw it accurately, how a few carefully chosen details brought the sketch to life, and the Gemini prompts used to produce the final images. Ready? As with most of our studio projects, this one began with a suggestion from one of the students. Lawrence wanted to design a small mobile ice cream stand in honor of a relative who loved ice cream. We started with a simple 8 by 16 foot plan and quickly worked out the proportions, the vending windows, and the structural rhythm that would eventually define the design. That's why we always begin with a plan. Before we sketch a building in perspective, we need to understand its proportions in 3 dimensions. Before I draw anything, I'm already thinking about what I want the image to communicate. I wanted the serving side of the ice cream stand visible, but far enough off-center to capture some of the park around it. And as with most of my sketches, I begin with a few rough scale figures. They establish the size of the structure and the horizon line, and from there the perspective sketch can begin to take shape. Now that the perspective is working, I can begin adding the details that will eventually give the project its personality. The roof overhang comes first because it establishes a sense of shelter and helps define the public face of the building. Next, I begin laying in the paired 2x4 members Lawrence envisioned, creating the structural rhythm that makes this design unique. And finally, I start locating the serving windows, working out their proportions and relationship to the people who will actually use the space. As I begin drawing the side of the structure, the project starts to take on real depth and proportion. This is also the point where I begin to understand what the sketch wants to become, and that's often a problem because the sketch almost always grows beyond the boundaries of the page. One of Procreate's superpowers is that I can simply select the entire sketch, scale it down proportionally, and create more room to continue drawing. I use this technique constantly. It allows the sketch to evolve naturally instead of forcing it to fit decisions I made earlier. This is one of my favorite moments in the sketching process. Somewhere along the way, the sketch stops being a drawing and starts becoming a design. As I add a few practical details, new opportunities begin to emerge. In this case, that led to a second roof overhang at the back of the structure. The design and the drawing truly evolve together, and each new line has the potential to suggest an idea you hadn't considered even a few minutes earlier. At this point, the building is essentially complete, and this is already enough information for Nano Banana. The sketch doesn't need to be beautiful, it just needs to be clear and proportionally accurate. And after a quick check of the horizon line, I begin adding people and context to help tell the story, suggesting the park, the gathering spaces, and the activity around the ice cream stand. These marks may look loose, but they're giving the AI exactly the information it needs to understand the scene. With the context now in place, the sketch starts talking back to me again. Once I can see the people, the park, and the activity around the project, it's much easier to spot opportunities to improve the design. So I spend a little more time refining the ice cream stand, especially that front overhang that will become the star of the show. Then I finish with one of my favorite tricks, adding a simple border around the sketch. It helps organize the composition for me, and it gives Nano Banana a much clearer sense of the image we're trying to create. This next step is completely optional, but it's a technique I've been teaching for years. I add what I call a layer of trace, essentially a translucent sheet of digital tracing paper placed over the sketch, and then continue drawing on a new layer above it. The goal isn't to make the sketch prettier, it's simply to give myself one last opportunity to check the proportions, refine a few details, and make sure the drawing is as clear as possible. Because whether the sketch is intended for a client presentation or for Nano Banana, the same rule applies. It doesn't have to be beautiful, but it does need to be clear and proportionally accurate. At this point, I like to do a quick reality check. Even after years of sketching, I'm not particularly interested in guessing whether my perspective is correct when Procreate can tell me in a matter of seconds. So I use Perspective Drawing Assist to quickly verify my vanishing points and check that the major elements of the sketch are converging where they should. In fact, one of the first things I discover is that part of the front facade isn't quite as accurate as I thought. With Drawing Assist activated, I can refine the vertical studs, the horizontal elements, and the roof structure with much greater confidence, knowing that the perspective is working properly. The goal isn't perfection, it's simply to make sure the sketch is clear, believable, and ready for Nano Banana. At this point, I stopped trying to improve everything. Instead, I began erasing portions of that tracing paper layer and allowing the rough sketch underneath to show through. And that's a good reminder that much of this sketch is still incredibly loose. The people, landscape, and background elements are really just suggestions. They aren't polished, but they are clear. And more often than not, that's all Nano Banana needs to understand what we're trying to create. This next step is optional, but the colors you add can influence the AI-generated image and give Nano Banana a few extra clues. Using the selection tool in freehand mode with color fill turned on, I quickly fill the polycarbonate panels with blue. Then in the Layers menu, I reduce the opacity to suggest the translucency of the panels while still allowing the framing behind them to show through. One of the reasons I love iPad drawing, and Procreate in particular, is how easy it is to go back into a drawing and make design changes at any point. Here I'm simply moving this door and these steps to create a better balanced composition. Again, this step isn't necessary, but I'm going to add another layer and quickly suggest some of the planting in the park using a textured brush. And notice how loose and simple these marks are. I'll also use that same select and fill method to create the background wall of buildings representing the NYU campus. These simple gray shapes combined with a text prompt will be enough to create a very convincing illusion of the campus beyond the park. Then I'll add some bold black strokes to suggest the seating area and deepen the shadow beneath the pavilion, helping clarify that it floats above the park surface on its chassis. As a final touch, I'll use that same select and fill technique to quickly block in a few larger background trees. The goal here is simply to show you how surprisingly crude and unfinished a sketch can be and still produce a convincing final image. Now I'll save the drawing out to iCloud Drive so I can continue working on my desktop. Simply choose Share, then Save to Files, make sure iCloud Drive is selected, and give the file a name you'll recognize when you switch over to your desktop. Now that we're on the desktop, I'll open Gemini, start a new chat, tap the plus button, and upload the sketch we just created. Once the image is attached, we're ready to provide Gemini with instructions describing what we'd like to do with the sketch. Now there are two main points I'd like to make here. First, if you're like me and not a very good typist, you can simply dictate these prompts and tell the story out loud. Second, the whole trick is to include information about the materials, the site, the lighting, and the atmosphere. In this case, I'm inventing all of that as a stream of consciousness exercise to show my students there's really no magic bullet here. I'll include both this prompt and my universal prompt in the free download link below. Once you've described those 4 ingredients, all that's left to do is hit the Submit button and watch what Nano Banana creates. And if I enlarge the image, you can see just how much Nano Banana was able to infer from that simple sketch. It not only captures the proportions of the pavilion, but also the glowing blue polycarbonate panels, the aluminum framing around the polycarbonate panels, the exposed joists up above, and even a series of believable steel connections in this framing here that I never actually drew. And the same thing happens throughout the park. We have the paving, the circular bench, the Washington Square fountain in the background, the NYU campus beyond, and a convincing canopy of trees, all created from a few simple marks and a text prompt. But what impresses me most is the lighting. The image naturally focuses our attention on the moment the ice cream is being handed to the customer, while small details like the glow at the access door help reinforce the story. None of these details were drawn by me, but all of them are consistent with the narrative of an ice cream pavilion in Washington Square Park, and it all started with a very crude sketch and a simple prompt. The Procreate file and all of the prompts used in this demonstration are available in the free download linked below. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss my next video. If you'd like to develop these skills further yourself, you'll also find information about our live draw-along studio. To see the next video in this series, click one of these choices, and I'll see you in the next video.